Shavua Tov, everyone. I hope you are all doing well and enjoying summer. It's a hot summer, so it's a lot of drinking water, but we are close already. We're almost at the close of summer and about to get to Rosh Chodesh Elul. We just did Shabbat Mevarchim on Shabbat, so you know the stress of tshuva is already creeping up on us. But every day we do tshuva, so this is a special time, and we're also during a very special time in Sefer Nechemia. But we are going to be starting Perek Yud Bet, and we're going to partake in a special parade, a very special parade around Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. Although I have to admit that the chapter is divided into two parts to our chapter. One is pretty boring. From Pasuk Aleph all the way to Pasuk Kaf Vav, more or less, is basically just a lot of names, and we'll go through them really quickly. I don't want to spend too much time on them. I'll explain what's happening, and then we're going to get to Pasuk Kaf Zayin 27, which things get a little bit more interesting, which is the Chanukah of the Chomat Yerushalayim, the new wall. The inauguration of the new wall that was built already a couple of chapters ago. Okay, so we're really divided into two. So we're going to start a little bit just to go through the first part, and we're going to do it quickly. I'm not going to read all of the names. We're not going to read all of the psukim just to save time, but I do want to spend a little bit time on explaining what's really going on in this part of the perek. So, within the renewed population of Yerushalayim, of Yehuda, there is an important place for the Kohanim and for the Leviim, because Yerushalayim is the place for worship. It's the place where the Beit HaMikdash was built. It's the whole idea of the Merkaz of Yerushalayim, right? The center of spirituality of Am Yisrael around the world. And that's why it was important for Ezra and for Nechemia to make sure the Kohanim and the Levim are set in the Yerushalayim area. So as I mentioned, the first half of the chapter really just brings a selection of data all about these Kohanim and the Levim, and it starts with the Kohanim that ascended and the Levim that ascended already way back during the time of Zerubbabel, who, if you remember, Zerubbabel ben Shaltiel and Yeshua, basically a list of 22 families of Kohanim who ascended during the first wave of Shavei Tzion. And that's basically from Pasuk Aleph all the way down to Pasuk Zayin. It just gives you all of the 22 different families that basically came down. So there's a record. It was important to Nechemia to have order and to have records, although I must admit I'm not going to do it in the scope of this shiur, but there's a discrepancy a little bit with the list that exists in Divrei Hayamim. Either way, it's important for Nechemia to do that. So that's the Kohanim. There's also a list of Levim who also immigrated during the days of Zerubbabel and Yeshua, and that's from Pasuk Chet and Tet going forward, as you see, Veha Leviim in Pasuk Chet, Veha Leviim, Yeshua, Binui, etc., right? And the genealogy also later on of the Kohen Gadol, starting from Pasuk Yud Aleph, right? Yehoyada was the Kohen Gadol, so it's the genealogy of him, who he was, how the great Kohanim, the Kohanim Agdolim, were established, the heads of the families in the days of Yehoyakim, really. And then there's a description of the different families and the Levim as well during the different periods of times, their different roles, what they did. If we go towards Pasuk Kaf Bet, right, tells you about the Leviim and the Rashi Avot, the families, who was in charge of the Sefer, who was in charge of later on the guards in Pasuk Kaf Hey, right, Shoarim, etc. That's basically the first half of our chapter. There's not much to say. Although, if this was a shiur all about a pure historical view, then we would have a lot to say. We would have to compare the two between this and Divrei Yamim. But it's really technical, very, very technical. Although one could ask, why did Nechemia include or exclude certain families versus the one in Divrei Yamim? And then we have to really go into the roles of Divrei Yamim versus Nechemia, really not in the scope of our shiur. What I do want to focus on is the second half of the chapter, and that's really Chanukat Chomat Yerushalayim, the inauguration of the wall of Yerushalayim Ir HaKodesh. And if you recall, we spent a lot of time in explaining how it was built, really how it was so important to Nechemia to come in and establish a wall for many, many reasons. For the security of Am Yisrael living in Yerushalayim. But in truth, as we mentioned, there weren't a lot of Jews living inside the wall. And hence, last week and 2 weeks ago, we learned that he had to have a lottery and bring in Jews to live inside the walls in order to populate Yerushalayim. And he wanted to make, facts on the ground. It was important for Nechemia to say, look, we're going to establish the Beit HaMikdash. We have to have Jews around the Beit HaMikdash. It's important for Yerushalayim inside the walls to be a very Jewish area, so that we can really bring back the glory of Yerushalayim. And then naturally, when there's a lot of people that live close to the Beit HaMikdash, naturally, real estate will go up and people will want to live close by, so they would live right outside the wall. And it's very important to Nechemia. So what we're going to do now from Pasuk Kaf Zayin all the way really until the end of the Perek, we'll discuss this really amazing parade that exists. So the description that we're going to see now, starting from Pasuk Kaf Zayin, the description of the inauguration of the Chomat Yerushalayim, basically returns to the literary genre, if you will, right? That we are familiar from the beginning of the book, really a story in the form of memories, of Nechemia's memories. He's just telling us what was going on, what happened. We're not living through the live parade that we're going to see, but really it's just his memories. And it's important to note that because of the style that exists. So the Chanukat Chomat Yerushalayim, the inauguration of the Jerusalem wall, was held with really great festivity. It really, really was. And there was a beautiful, beautiful march all around Yerushalayim. Now, for the sake of our shiur today, when I say Yerushalayim, I'm basically talking about Yerushalayim Ir HaAtikah, inside the walls, right? Not outside. So when I say Yerushalayim, we're talking about inside. So there's a parade that will surround Yerushalayim. And the Kohanim and the Leviim, they basically climbed up on top of the wall. They really walked on the walls. When I was young, this must be 1985, 1986. I remember my parents took us to walk on the walls, to really walk on the walls of Yerushalayim. And until today, people don't do it anymore, really. But there are a couple of sections. I see people nodding. A couple of sections that you can still walk on the walls. Mamash. If you go down towards the Ir HaAtikah, towards the Kotel, you can actually walk on the walls, on the Chomot Yerushalayim. And that's something that wasn't new. It was 2,000 years old, and they did that during this time as well. So there's a parade, right? Mind you that the Chomot, the walls that we have today, are not the same Chomot. I showed you all a couple of weeks ago the walls that Nechemia built, which are very different. The limits of Yerushalayim are much broader today. So we only have a couple of those walls left, but the majority of the wall really was expanded. So we're talking about, just envision, I'll show you a map a little bit later, but envision, basically, there's a parade, and the Kohanim, the Levim, Am Yisrael, they're going to be walking on top of the walls, surrounding Yerushalayim, surrounding the city. But it wasn't just, people walking. There were instruments. So beautiful, beautiful instruments and melodies and chants, and accompanied by this by songs and cymbals and harps and violins and trumpets. Really, during this time, there were also offerings of korbanot inside. Really was a huge gala, a beautiful parade with songs and thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the idea of this parade. The parade, the inauguration, the Chanukah, was really just to show a thank you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for all that transpired, all that Hashem did over the last years, not just the building of the wall, but how they were able to build the wall. When we had Sanballat and Geshem Amoni and Arav, we had all these outside foreigners and these Shomronim and the Ashdodim really trying to tear it down. And, as we mentioned many times, so we were saved, with the genius of Nechemia, only at night times, and making sure that every family took part of it, and it became a project of all of Israel. So it's about time to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That also shows the mindset of Am Yisrael during this time. They went through so much, the time of Ezra and Nechemia, the whole idea of assimilation and trying to divorce their non-Jewish wives, and we talked about that a lot, and accepting upon themselves a new agreement to accept, not just the Dinei Deoraita, as we mentioned, but Dinei Derabanan, that they didn't have to do, but they decided to do it. They wanted to go into a new covenant. Really, what's going on in Yerushalayim is a new wave of modern orthodoxy, right? A new wave of people coming back to orthodoxy, coming back to being Shomer Torah mitzvot. And the first thing they want to do after everything is set and done is thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And they decided to do it through a beautiful parade with songs and instruments. Really a fun, festive time for Am Yisrael, and it reminds us a little bit. I'll talk about it a little bit later on about Tza'adat Yerushalayim, the Jerusalem parade. It's not new. I mean, this happened 2,500 years ago. Now the route of the parade, the route exactly where they went is documented in our perek, and it seems that basically two groups follow two different routes. There are basically two sections that follow two different routes. Okay, so we're going to read now Psukim Kaf Zayin to Kaf Tet. Okay, so let's go inside. Perek Yud Bet 12, Psukim Kaf Zayin 27. We'll read a couple of Psukim. ובחנוכת חומת ירושלים ביקשו הלוויים מכל מקומותם להביאם לירושלים לעשות חנוכה ושמחה, ובתודות, ובשיר, מצלתיים, נבלים וכינורות. ויאספו בני המשוררים, ומן הכיכר סביבות ירושלים, ומן חצרי נטופתי. So basically, when the city of the walls were dedicated, Chanukah, the Leviim were brought in from wherever they were living, a little bit outside of Yerushalayim as well. Not all of them could fit inside, as you recall, we discussed that. But they all wanted to join, so they were brought in special because they're important. They're the singers. They're the ones who can play the instruments. They're important for the, every celebration today, whether you have a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, whether you have a wedding, you have a 70th birthday, you have a 50th wedding ceremony, a 60th. You want to have music. Music brings of joy. And here too, we wanted to have music and to bring up the voice. So they brought in all of the Levim who were in charge of the music. They had cymbals, they had harps. They really had really everything that was good for them. The singers, as we mentioned, and so forth. Pasuk Kaftet. Umi Beit HaGilgal ומשדות גבע ועז מוות כי חצרים בנו להם המשוררים סביבות ירושלים. Basically just telling us that before the inauguration started, they just brought in all of the Levim from different places so that they can be a part of the parade, so that they can bring in the simcha of the todah, of the thank you to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Pasuk Lamed. ויטהרו הכהנים והלוויים ויטהרו את העם ואת השערים ואת החומה. All of a sudden, Pasuk Lamed comes by, right? The Kohanim and the Levim performed ritual purification for themselves, for the people, the gates, and for the city wall. All of a sudden, the people were purified. Possibly mikvah, so that inside of the walls of Yerushalayim would be tahor, pure. And when I first read this pasuk, it was to me, maybe to you as well, it was a little perplexing to me. I mean, ma pitom, you have to go to the mikvah. Now, on the one hand, you want to go up, and you're going to be going close to the Beit HaMikdash. But in truth, you're not going inside the Beit HaMikdash, as we're going to see later. So it's a little perplexing to me why during this inauguration, that's what it's called. It's called the Chanukat Chomot Yerushalayim, a very political event, right? It's all about how we built the walls for security reasons, etc. It's not a religious event. The whole event here is not a religious one. It's political. A Chanukah, like when you buy a house or a home, and you do a Chanukat Bayit, it's not a religious event. It's I have a home to live in. So they have a new city to live in, guarded by walls. What is this whole idea of this purification, this religious aspect of it? So it's possible, and this is what I'm trying to introduce. I think this has a lot of merit, what I'm about to say, just my opinion. It's possible that Nechemia wants to connect religion and state. That's what he really wants to do. A connection, the exact connection that troubled Sanballat and all of his people, meaning creating a state within the Persian Empire, right? In a government that also is governed by faith, not just a place where the same group of people live together in harmony, but they also share faith. It's not just about having a walled city for the protection and for to make sure that they can live in peace, but also for faith. I mean, if you look at Nineveh, and if you look at Shushan, these were cities that were built way before these walls were put up. They weren't about faith. It was about showing that this is the Ir Bira, this is the capital of Persia, Shushan, right? It was governed. There was big walls. Nobody can come in. It's controlled by the army. It wasn't about faith. Here, Nechemia is purifying, getting ready for Kedusha. He's basically intertwining the idea of politics and religion, really government and state and religion. Nechemia could have created a state, a region. He was a governor of the region of Yehuda. He could have just basically created a state that had a place of worship on its side, right? Meaning, okay, we have a state, we have a city, and there's a Beit Mikdash for those who want to pray, those who want to worship. But instead, he establishes a state that has a clearly religious nature to it, not an add-on for those who are religious. Rather, the focus of the state is the Beit HaMikdash, and therefore, you want to come to Yerushalayim, you have to purify yourself, even if you're not about to go into the Beit HaMikdash area. So maybe, last week we discussed the whole idea of Derabanan for the first time, where Am Yisrael were accepting upon themselves a Derabanan, something that is not explicitly in the Torah, but rather a Gader, right? Like, for instance, Shemitah, that they did not have to follow. Because in order to follow Shemitah from the Torah, you have to have a majority of Am Yisrael living in Eretz Yisrael, and clearly that's not the case here, and many other aspects that we saw. So maybe here, with the whole idea of Yerushalayim and having them go ahead and immerse themselves in a mikvah and purify the gates and purify the wall itself, because maybe for the first time he's introducing the idea of Torah ve'avodah. And maybe that's the first time it's being established. So this parade, as we will see, basically have two sides to it as well. And that's why I think this Torah ve'avodah thing is so true. I mentioned that, as we're going to read, it's not one parade going from point A to point B. It's a parade divided into two. There are two groups, Group A and Group B. Group A is led by Ezra, who represents Torah. Group B is led by Nechemia, who represents Avodah. Now, they could have gone together. You could have gone together, Ezra and Nechemia, and then everyone would follow. But in this point in time, the idea of Torah v'avodah, the idea of Kedusha on the one hand and Avodah on the other hand, building a wall, but also immersing it in a mikvah, meaning making it holy, didn't exist. Had they all gone together, maybe Nechemia is thinking maybe they would have missed out on that. But what we're going to see is they start out in different locations, Ezra, Torah, Nechemia Avoda, they surround Yerushalayim, going the opposite way until they meet. And that meeting is very, very special. The meeting of Ezra, the meeting of Nechemia, the meeting of two different ways of thinking, the two different ways of leadership. As I didn't get to the summary of Sefer Ezra and Nechemia, which we'll do, next week and next couple of weeks. But that's what's very unique. So we have Ezra and we have Nechemia. So in Nechemia's vision, it was really the grand leader here. He's the actual leader. Ezra is the spiritual leader, but the leader is Nechemia. His vision that the Judean region that he's in charge of is not just another region in the Persian Empire, but a state whose most prominent feature is its religious side. That's what's unique about Nechemia. Therefore, even in a political event such as the inauguration of the Choma, the wall, the religious side is brought forward to enrich the people, as we shall see. So, as I mentioned, there's a split, two sections to the parade, basically two ways to say thank you to God, right? We're going to see that, two ways to say thank you to God. Each surrounds a different side of the wall. On the one side goes Ezra, and on the other side, Nechemia, and together they surround the entire wall. The distance, as I'll show you, the distance that Nechemia travels is greater. It's a longer distance, perhaps maybe because Ezra walked on a more difficult side, and Nechemia walked on an easier side. So also Nechemia, who represents Avoda, takes the longer route, right? And Ezra, who represents Torah, takes the shorter route. So let's jump in, and we're going to go through the psukim, and then I'll show you a map of what I think it looked like. Okay, so we're going to start from pasuk Lamed Aleph, is really where we just start to talk about the different sections of the parade. I should have put in like music, like some beautiful music, but have in mind beautiful music. Va'ale tzarei Yehuda me'al lachoma. ועמידה שתי תודות גדולות ותהלוכות לימין מעל החומה לשער האשפות. וילך אחריהם הושעיה וחצי שרי יהודה, ועזריה, עזרא ומשולם, יהודה ובנימין, ושמעיה וירמיה, ומבני הכהנים בחצוצרות, זכריה בן יונתן, בן שמעיה, בן מתניה, בן מיכיה, בן זכור, בן אסף, ואחיו שמעיה ועזראל מללי גיללי מעי נתנאל ויהודה חנני בכלי שיר דוד איש האלוהים ועזרא הסופר לפניהם. So Nechemia is, like I said, in the first person. He's telling us what's going on. It's his memories. He says, I assembled the leaders of Yehuda on top of the wall, and I put them in charge of two large groups to march around the city, giving a thank you to Hashem. The first group went to the right on top of the wall towards one of the gates. I'll show you in a minute, right? And Hoshaya marched behind the singers. It's important that the singers led the group because they're chatzotzot, they're singing beautiful, melodies. And then we had the Kohanim, they were blowing the trumpets. After that marched Azariah, different names are put forward, right? And it was followed by the members of the different families, Shmaya, Azrael, etc. Musical instruments from all kinds. And Ezra, he was the one who led the group. So that is section number 1. Let's read section number 2, and then I'll show you it. I'll show it to you on a map. So the first section is Ezra. Okay, we'll call it the Eastern Thanksgiving procession, right? The Eastern one. It's one section, and they march over the wall from Shar HaAshpot against the direction of the clock, right? Counterclockwise, right? Counterclockwise, going to the right. And why are they going to the right? Because Ezra is the one who is leading this group. And as you know, in Torah, you always go to the right. You always go to the right, right? We know, min hayamin. So Ezra, since he's the leader and he represents Torah, he's going to the right. Nechemia goes to the left, as we're going to see soon. So the direction is counterclockwise. When they get to Shar Ha'ain, they're joined by more marchers that we saw from the city of David, right? From we saw at the end of Pasuk Lamed Vav from Glacier from Ir David, and they advanced north to Shar Hamayim. Okay, Ezra marches at the head of the parade, and behind him is, like I mentioned, Hoshaya and 7 of the ministers, and Yehuda, Kohanim, blowing the trumpets, singers, followed by Zechariah, etc. Right? I can only fathom the beauty of this march with singers and beautiful trumpets and nifalim, and really, really, really gorgeous. Many musicians, like I said, similar to Tza'adat Yerushalayim, the Jerusalem march that we had just a few months ago. So Tza'adat Yerushalayim is not a new thing. It's basically over 2,500 years old. So that's section number 1, right? It goes on to the right and goes up to the Beit HaMikdash area from Shar Hashpot all the way to Shar Hamayim, etc. Section number 2 starts from Pasuk Lamed Zayin all the way to Mem Gimel. So, Pasuk Lamed Zayin. Ve'al Shar Ha'ayin ve'negdam alu al ma'alot Ir David be'ma'ale lachuma me'al lebeit David ve'ad Shar Hamayim mizrach. So, a different route was taken by Nechemia. At the fountain gate, that's where it starts. They went up the steps that led to Ir David, past David's palace, and back to the wall at Shar Hamayim, the water gate, on the east side of the city. Ve'atoda hashenit ha'holechet what is this? Lemol va'ani achareh. Second one, I'm following it. וחצי העם מעל החומה, מעל למגדל התנורים, ועד החומה הרחבה. ומעל לשער אפרים, ועל שער הישנה, ועל שער הדגים, ומגדל חננאל, ומגדל המאה, ועד שער הצאן, also in a minute, ועמדו בשער המטרה, ותעמודנה שתי התודות בבית האלוהים, ואני וחצי הסגנים עמי. So they're going on the left. We'll see where they go in a moment. But I noticed something very interesting. I noticed, where is it? I lost my bearings. Just 1 minute. So in Pasuk Lamedchet, I noticed, in Pasuk Lamedchet 38, the procession starts, and it says, Va'ani achareha. Basically, Nechemia is the last one. He's at the end of the line, not in the beginning. He's not leading this procession. He's not leading this section of the parade. Unlike with Ezra, Ezra led the parade, whereas with Nechemia, he's in the back. So the second section of the parade was on the west. We'll call it the Western procession. And this parade marches over the wall with Nechemia following it, right? Va'ani achareha, following it. Unlike with Ezra's section, who led the parade, here Nechemia is at the end, following it. It's a very nice idea. I think that with Ezra, since he represents Torah, he's leading. Torah leads. Whereas with Nechemia, it's not very important, but also as a anav, as a really great leader, he feels that there's no need for him to lead the parade. He doesn't think that he needs the kavod. There are some people in the world who just need the kavod no matter what. You know, here he's saying, Ani lo tzarich kavod. I don't need the kavod. I can be in the back. I can be at the end. I'll let other people take the lead. I'll let other people go ahead. I mean, sach hakol, everyone is happy, right? Everyone is happy to go ahead and dance and have fun. And it's not important who leads the way, right? Maybe with Ezra it is, because Kvod HaTorah. Kvod HaTorah, you want to have the Manhiga Ruchani start, not because he needs the Kavod, it's because it's Kvod HaTorah. It's not about Ezra, but it's about what he represents. That's what's important. Whereas Nechemia, he feels, I'm just a leader, I'm a political leader. You know, there's no need for me, I don't need the Kavod to lead. I can go on the back. And that's why there's an emphasis, Ve'ani achareha. I am in the back. Such a great leader. A true leader doesn't need to always be in the front, doesn't need to always have the kavod to be number one. he really feels that he's doing a great job by having them actually march and be happy. That is Nechemia. And it progresses clockwise, right? Goes left all the way up through Migdal Tanurim, the broader side of the wall, through the gates of Ephraim, Hayeshana, Hatzon, Migdal Chanamel, and all the way up to Shara Matara that he goes as well, and all the way until they meet through the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, so I'm going to show you. I'll show you my map that I created, and hopefully things will be understood a little bit more. Let me just get it. Share screen. Okay, let me just. Okay, I hope everybody sees it. Okay, so this, as you can see in front of you, let me just make this a little smaller. This is Yerushalayim. We saw this a couple of times, right? Because I can't see anybody. I'm looking at my screen, so I hope everybody sees my screen as well. So this is the Beit HaMikdash area, right? And this is where all of Am Yisrael, the Kohanim, some of the Levi'im, and a tenth of every clan, a tenth of every family, right? If you recall, they were put into the city over here, and they were also volunteers, as we mentioned last week. So basically, this is the short area where Ezra takes. He goes from Sha'ar HaShpot over here, and he goes all the way up over here, up to this Sha'ar over here, which is the entrance to the Beit HaMikdash area, right? Now, why did he? Now, mind you, he's walking on the Chumah. I didn't want to do it on top of it, but it's on top of it. It's a very short. It's not too long, but in the terrain, if you note some of the terrain, there's a guy here. It's a very rocky area, not very easy, and the Chumah here must have been also lots of ups and downs. I'm just guessing. Either way, that was the route that Ezra took. Nechemia took. He started from this area over here. He went all the way around on the Chumah to meet Ezra, the same area over here. Now, I started over here. I'm assuming he started here, but I can't find evidence for that. So I just put it over here from the Sha'ar over here. But I'm assuming they all started from this area. It's just a guess. I'm venturing a guess, but it does say that they really hakfu it all of Yerushalayim. But the evidence, I'm sure, is there. I can't find it. Either way, this is what it looked like. So you have Ezra, the Torah, going the right side, because Hayamin is important in Halacha and Torah. We always go to the right. That's why we also put on our right shoe first. The only reason why we tie our left shoe is because tying is our tefillin, and most people are lefties. We won't get into the Halacha, but either way, that's why he goes to the right. Nechemia goes onto the left, and he goes all around, and he gets to the same area. So that's what we're really talking about with this parade. Two sections, and they meet mamash right here. Let me just get a highlighter. Okay, right, they meet over here. Right, so Ezra goes this way, and Nechemia, I assume, starts over here, but I just can't find evidence from it. He goes all the way over here, all around, and they meet over here, Torah ve'avodah, mamash, and they go inside. And this is where they have the korbanot that we'll see in a minute later as well. So I hope that's clear for everybody. So I hope that puts things a little bit in perspective. What's really going on here? Two sections, one going to the right, one going all around. That is Ezra, and then we have Nechemia, and that's really, really wonderful. Now we saw the word todah, shtei hatodot. If you go to pasuk mem, where we just ended, v'ta'amodna shtei hatodot beveit ha'elohim. There are two thank yous. What does that mean, two thank yous? I don't know what two thank yous mean. I tried to figure out what two thank yous mean. What I came up with as far as thank yous, right, is that there are two ways to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. One, through a korban todah. We see that in Sefer Vayikra. Korban todah, I thank you, that has, right, the sacrifice, a gratitude, literally a korban todah. But I think also the pshat of the pasuk, or these psukim of a todah, is basically a thank you through prayer and song. Mamash prayer and song, and I think that's something new. The Chazal Chazal in Masechet Shavuot, when they were reading these psukim, they assumed that we're only talking about Korban Todah. Shtei Todot, there must have been 2 Korban Todah, maybe possibly 1 Korban Todah that was done by Ezra, 1 Korban Todah done by Nechemia, because the Mishnah on Shavuot discusses it. But I think, this is not a Gemara share, we're looking at the Pshat, but if you look at Pasuk Kaf Zayin, if you go back to Kaf Zayin, the first pasuk of the Chanukat HaChoma, if you go back to Kaf Zayin, I want to read it. U'bechanukat chomat Yerushalayim bikshu et halevim mikol mekomotam lehavim Yerushalayim. Then it says, La'asot Chanukah vesimcha u'todot u'beshir mitziltayim devalim. I think it's really a mizmor letodah. So I really think that the second type of todah doesn't mean sacrifice, but it means song, possibly mizmor letodah. We say mizmor letodah every single morning in Psukei de Zimra, from the word Zimra, song. Whole first section of Shacharit, the first section of Shacharit that we start from Baruch She'amar is called Psukei de Zimra. It's psukim of song. One of them is mizmor letodah. I did a halacha on this a long time ago. I try to noheg this as well. Is that when you say mizmor letodah, you're supposed to sing it. Mizmor is supposed to be sung. Mamash, mizmor letodah, just like the Levim and the Kohanim and Am Yisrael did here in Yerushalayim in the inauguration of the Choma. They sang. So I think the 2 todot is, one is by sacrifice, one is an offering, and the one is from the heart, a shir, which we've never seen that yet here in the Torah, in the Ktuvim. In the Torah, we have Az Yashir Moshe after Kriyat Yamsuf, but that's Lishon Tfilah of a thanking God right after they were saved. Here, it's part of a parade, but there's also Korban Todah and a song. Somewhere along the line after Shirat Hayam, there are a couple of other shirot as well. The idea of a shirah as a thanking God isn't prominent anymore. But here, it seems like Nechemia is bringing it back. I think so. That's how I read the 2 Todot. Finally, the 2 processions, as we meant, these 2 sections, they meet, they converge, and they get to Beit HaMikdash, where many sacrifices were offered. The event ends by emphasizing the joy that was in Yerushalayim, right? So let's just finish the 3-4 more psukim. והכהנים, אליקים, מעשיה, מיכיה, אליוני וכולי וכולי, right? וישמיעו המשוררים, ויזרחיה הפקיד, ויזבחו ביום ההוא זבחים גדולים, וישמחו. So elevated, such a great joy. Why? כי האלוהים, right? This is פסוק מ"ג, כי האלוהים שמחה גדולה. וגם אנשים והילדים שמחו, ותשמע שמחת ירושלים. Emphasis comes to say that this is a formative event. Nechemia returns the independence to Yerushalayim, to Yehuda. This event is reminiscent of the founding of the Beit HaMikdash when we read Ezra Perek Gimel during the time of Zerubbabel and Sheshbatzar and all those, has a parallel phrases, hearing the joy from afar, something that annoyed all of our neighbors, right? It annoyed them that we are happy building our sanctuaries. And apparently, it still does annoy our Arabs, because when we do the Tzeadat Yerushalayim, just like they did over here, they are extremely annoyed by us and they try to shut it down. I assume very similar to what happens here, but here Nechemia did it in such a great way. And it could be Yachol Lihiyot, another reason why he divided into two sections, as you saw, one going up to the right, going to the left. From a technical point of view, I gave a nice spiritual idea, but from a technical point of view, if they go out at the same time and they're covering all Yerushalayim at the same time, it's harder for the enemies. It's harder for Sanballat and Geshem Amoni and Tuviyah, etc. It's harder for them to try to stop the parade. More people, they're covering more ground, therefore it's a little harder. So this inauguration of the Choma means that Yehuda is now becoming an independent within the Persian Empire. And this is an important enterprise that Nechemia creates an independence, right? kind of like fast food, right? Like an express independence. He doesn't have a lot of time to plan everything. He just has to do it. To, like I said, facts on the ground. He puts people in Yerushalayim. He does it really quickly because that's what's needed to do. When you want to make sure that things happen properly, that's what you do. So it's like kind of like an express independence. He doesn't have a choice because of all the surrounding enemies. Nechemia's leverage, clearly political because he has the authority, but he also uses this event to infuse the idea of the religious aspect of Yahadut. I want to introduce something very, very interesting, a very interesting thing to note. This is not the last time that the Kohanim, because we mentioned the whole first part of Perek Yud Bet is all about the Kohanim and the Levim. They come and they immigrate and they jumpstart the whole idea of the spirituality of Yerushalayim. Ezra was a Kohen and he comes in. It's not the last time there's a Kohen that immigrated to Yerushalayim and builds Beit HaMikdash or builds Yerushalayim. In 1904, there was a very, very important Rav who immigrated and came to Eretz Israel. Who was he? Harav Kook. Rav Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook. He wasn't just a Rav, he was a Kohen as well. He immigrated to Eretz Israel. One of the most important rabbis in the history of modern Israel. I think so for sure. And also one of the founders of religious Zionism, which I assume most people here identify with. Now, Rav Kook in the beginning, initially when he came to Eretz Israel, he became the chief rabbi of Yafo, not yet Yerushalayim, but after Milchemet HaOlam HaRishona, after the World War I, he moved to Yerushalayim and kind of closed a circle with those Kohanim from Shevei Tzion, because now we have an important Kohen, like Ezra, an important Kohen, who now came to Eretz Israel. Now, what did Ezra do? It was very important for Ezra Sofer to establish a Beit Mikdash, a working Beit Mikdash. We learned that, right? Nechemia was about the wall. Ezra was about establishing a working Beit Mikdash, infusing spirituality into Am Yisrael in Yehuda. Harav Kook, who was a Kohen as well, a leader, one of our leaders, the most amazing connection I found between the two. Most of Rav Kook's work was in the religious thought, similar to Ezra. He wasn't a political leader, he was a religious leader. But he also acted practically on behalf of the Jews when he put the British in their place on a very important question. Do you know what question I'm talking about? The ownership of the Kotel, the ownership of the Western Wall, the ownership of the Kotel. Harav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, his son, Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook's son, recalls the tremendous pressure that was placed upon his father, Harav Kook, Rav Avraham Yitzchak Kook, the evening in 1930, in a place called Kiryat Moshe, that we all know, Kiryat Moshe, a very important neighborhood in Yerushalayim. And I want to share something from one of the writings of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook in a volume called Lenetivot Yisrael. I want to share my screen. Can you all see the screen? Can you see the screen, everyone?
We just see you.
Oh, so let me try again. 1 second, I just want to, there we go. So if you just see me, that's not good. I don't need you to see me. I need you to see my screen. Here. Oh, okay.
Now it's up. Now it's up.
Metsuyan, thank you. Okay, so you see Lenetivot Israel, everyone?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so in Netivot Israel, this is what Rav Tzvi says. How intense, how grave, how dire were the warnings and intimidations at that time. With all of their menacing threats, we're talking about Hajj al-Lamin, we're talking about the Arabs, the Palestinians, the British, two nations, the Arabs and the British, were goading us with lies and marudis traps to sign an agreement and relinquish Jewish ownership over the Kotel, the remaining wall of our holy temple. It's like he was a Kohen coming to Eretz Yisrael, and the British and the Arabs were trying to ensure that we no longer have ownership, that we relinquish ownership over that we give it to them. So in the summer of 1930, the League of Nations dispatched a committee to Eretz Yisrael to clarify the ownership of the Kotel HaMa'aravi. The Arabs claimed to be the rightful owners, not only of Har HaBayit, but also of the Kotel. Now, this is important. They rejected any agreement that permitted Jews to pray at the Kotel HaMa'aravi. They claimed it is solely a Muslim site, and the Mufti claimed that the Jews may pray at the Kotel only by the good grace of the Arabs, meaning we will allow you to pray there if you sign an agreement that it belongs to the Muslims, to the Arabs who live there. Amazing. So we have Rav Kook, who is a Kohen, who came from the diaspora, immigrated, came to Yerushalayim, similar to Ezra. When Rav Kook appeared before the commission, he turned to the chairman with deep, deep emotion. And he says, what do you mean when you say the commission will decide to whom the wall belongs, right? He says, does this commission of the League of Nations own the wall? Who gave you permission to who it belongs? The entire world, Rav Kook says, belongs to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He transferred ownership of the entire land to Am Yisrael, including the Kotel. Including the Kotel. Unbelievable. No power in the world, not the League of Nations, nor this commission, says Rav Kook, can take this God-given right away from us. Sounds familiar? Sounds like everything that Ezra and Nechemia have been trying to do. And here we have a Kohen, 1904, now it's 1930, who's a leader, the spiritual leader of Am Yisrael, the chief rabbi of Israel, similar to Ezra, saving the Kotel from the hands of the Arabs. Now, Rav Kook's response was that despite intense pressure from this Vad Leumi, Rav Kook refused to authorize the proposal. Mapito, we have no authority to do such a thing, he says. The Jewish people did not empower us to surrender the Kotel HaMa'aravi on its behalf. Mapito, our ownership over the Kotel is divine in nature. And it is by virtue of this ownership that we come to pray at the Kotel. I cannot relinquish that which God gave to the Jewish people. Heaven forbid, we surrender the Kotel. God will not wish us to return to it. He will not wish us. He won't come back to us. If we give up the Kotel, Hashem will give up on us. That's what Rav Kook did. And in a way, he saved Am Yisrael. Very similarly to Ezra and Nechemia that we just read in our Perek, in Perek Yud Bet. There's an addendum to this, which I had no clue about, but Rav Menachem Porush brings a very, very interesting, he was the chairman of Agudat Yisrael, and he contributed a very, very cool detail I had no clue about. He says that Rav Kook, when he received the proposal from this from this commission, so he stated that he would of course not agree to relinquish the Jewish claim to the Kotel under any circumstances. So what Rav Kook did, says Rav Porush, he also dispatched a personal message to Rav Zunenfeld to inform him of his refusal and to beg Rav Zunenfeld also not to show the British any lack of determination in the matter. Do not sign anything, Rav Kook wanted to make sure. Now, Rav Zunenfeld, when he received the notice also of the proposal, he also refused to agree to it. But he was afraid that Rav Kook might not be firm enough in refusing the proposal. So Rav Zunenfeld dispatched his own messenger to Rav Kook to inform him of the policy and to request that Rav Kook not show any willingness to compromise on the matter. The two messengers, according to Rav Porush, who happened to be personal friends, they met in the street and discussed their missions and their messages, both were relieved when they realized that there was no real need to deliver their respective messages, because the plan, which would have compromised Jewish rights to the Kotel HaMa'aravi for generations, died. And therefore there was no chance in Rav Kook or Rav Zunefeld relinquishing any of that. So in a way, these two figures, Rav Zunefeld and Rav Kook, saved Am Yisrael from who knows what would have happened had we said out loud that we are relinquishing control. Had we said out loud we're giving up on the Kotel, Chas v'Chalila, we would never do that. It's an amazing connection between the Kohanim and the Leviim that we just discussed and mentioned in Perek Yud Bet and Rav Kook, that came after 2,000 years to a new Geula, the chief rabbi of Israel. He was a Kohen himself, and he was a spiritual leader. He himself, together with Rav Zunefeld, saved the Kotel from the hands of the Arabs, and we have the rights to daven there today. Pretty amazing. So with that, we summarized basically Perek Yud Bet. We have a couple more psukim. But the psukim that remain from Mem Dalid to Mem Zayin are an extra that will Ezrat Hashem learn and read and study next week. So wishing everybody a Shavua Tov. Linger on this beauty. Go to sleep tonight with this beautiful parade in your mind, seeing how lucky we are to live in Yerushalayim and what it must have looked like with flags and trumpets and a big carnival of beautiful people really thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu for bringing us back to Yerushalayim. So Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, thank you.
Shavua Tov. Thank you for putting life into these words. I can picture it. Thank you.
Toda Rabba.
Toda Rabba, that was very exciting.
It was. It really was. The Tanakh in general is exciting, but Ezra and Nechemia are two very important books, as we're all noticing how important, how relevant these two figures are to us. Halavai, we would have one of them or both of them as our leaders, as the Gemara says. So we're lucky that we get to at least read and see who they are as people. But we haven't summarized yet. We haven't really gone there yet. But Be'ezrat Hashem, we will in the future. Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov, Toda Rabba.
Shavua Tov. Thank you, Rav.